From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. School districts across Colorado have been suspending kids at significantly higher rates than before the pandemic. That's according to a recent analysis of data in the Denver Post, which found that school administrators across Colorado have been issuing suspensions 25% more than in 2018. Those figures are even higher in Denver public schools, which have seen out-of-school suspensions jump by 42% since 2018. Many districts with higher suspension rates also struggle to hire school counselors or special education teachers, positions that often help curb problematic behavior. So why is this happening more frequently? And is there a better strategy? For answers, we turn to Dr. Lauren Henry. She's a clinical psychologist with Children's Hospital Colorado. She works with students who struggle with behavior issues and advises educators on how to respond. Lauren says she understands a student getting an out-of-school suspension if they're a threat to others. But she said she often sees educators use disciplinary options that pull kids out of the classroom for more minor infractions.
An example, a family that we worked with, it was a young elementary student, and by October of that school year had already been suspended upwards of 20 times.
Wow.
I mean, by October, we're talking about missing almost 50% of their education time in the classroom. And what was documented on paper was disrespect. No more details, no instant reports, just disrespect. And like many of our kiddos, this child had been through a lot the past couple of years, right? Losing loved ones, family financial struggles, recent diagnoses of depression and anxiety. We found that the disrespect, right, that was documented was actually a pattern of this child refusing to participate, just walking out of the room, ripping up their paper, putting their head down right on the desk, yelling at the teacher just to leave them alone. All problematic, certainly maladaptive responses to distress, and all behaviors that need action and intervention, but there was no targeted violence or immediate safety concern. And so the challenge that we're facing is to better understand why this child was repeatedly met with such punitive and seemingly disproportionate, most importantly, ineffective responses of discipline from the school teams.
And I do want to understand why this is happening, as we're seeing the data that schools are using more exclusionary tactics like out-of-school suspension to punish students for, as you mentioned, relatively minor nonviolent offenses. And this is happening in conjunction with staffing shortages. So what is the relationship between those two things?
Oh my God, such an important point. And we have more and more research that is identifying as school staff stress and exhaustion, burnout rates increases, the use of exclusionary discipline practices also increase. So certainly as kids are, screaming and running out of the classroom and ripping up their papers, like our example, there's going to be more teacher stress. There is going to be more stress on our system. But what we found was that when we accounted for actual student misbehavior, where we went in to observe the student's behavior, that it was not explained by just the increase in behavior. I always say that this pandemic did not happen to our children in isolation, right? It happened to our families and our communities and certainly our schools. So as the systems are under more stress, we see them reaching for these more immediate, more punitive discipline practices, like out-of-school suspension.
Right. And I have to say, I can kind of understand if you have schools that are short-staffed or you have teachers that are stressed out, that, the easiest and what might seem like the least disruptive move is to kick students out for a few days. Why are out-of-school suspensions a bad thing?
We can go back to the example we're talking about earlier. That story, it's heartbreaking for everyone. The child who spent more time out of the classroom than in it, right? The family who has to keep coming and picking up their child from school every single day. I think that what is most heartbreaking is knowing the data, right? As a researcher, I know that every time a child is, excluded from the classroom, even from just an office discipline referral. But certainly the link between out-of-school suspension and dropout rates, incarceration rates, it is such a strong relationship, because when they're suspended, the likelihood of them being suspended again goes up substantially. And if this discipline practice was working, we would see them stop engaging in the behavior, if that makes sense. But they're actually at much greater risk at being suspended and expelled and dropping out in the longer term.
It's important to note here that some students are especially at risk from suspensions and their long-term effects. A report from a Colorado legislative task force shows that punishments like out-of-school suspensions or expulsions tend to disproportionately target students of color or those with disabilities. And an analysis from the University of Colorado found students who attend schools with higher suspension rates are more likely to be incarcerated as adults. So Lauren says finding alternatives to out-of-school suspension is critical.
So first and foremost, prevention and early intervention of risk, and doing that in a more systematic way. So being able to identify concerns for anxiety, depression, anger, frustration, to be able to identify that and support earlier and teach our kids what to do. We know that a positive behavior intervention support system is actually what is effective in curbing or reducing problematic behavior, is by teaching our children what to do and what is a helpful adaptive response.
Okay, so just a final takeaway here. In your opinion, is an out-of-school suspension ever a good idea?
For me, as a researcher, is where my heart hurts the most for our kids when I see out-of-school suspension or expulsion used, because it sometimes puts them on the path, or it keeps them on a path to drop out to the juvenile justice system, to really not finding success in or out of the classroom. In Colorado and in many other states, there's been a lot of development around alternative to suspension programs, where there is more staffing and support and adherence to safety. So I think that's such an important part of any disciplinary practice, is that our kids are still getting access to their education, because every day they do not is another data point of risk for them. So even if we're removed from a general classroom, what other supports are they getting access to?
Dr. Lauren Henry is with Children's Hospital Colorado. We'll include links to that Denver Post analysis and other research around school suspensions in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks for listening.